a marine turtle that came up to lay eggs, and the jaguar at night killed the turtle to eat, and it's still there in the early morning hours. And these are the vultures who are all sitting around to eat off that same carcass once the jaguar is gone. And this is one of the park staff right here. And the Minister of the Environment is standing about 5 feet behind him. And the cat finally gets up and walks right up through here like this and goes out of the picture that way. We have a video of that as well. But this is what happens a lot, is that these animals who are endangered are preying on another animal who's endangered, the marine turtle. And so you end up with two endangered species knocking each other down. And because the turtle, as the turtle density goes down, the food for the jaguars goes down. But as the jaguar density goes up, they start knocking the turtle density down. So it's a very tight interaction going on the beach. And this is not a jaguar eating turtle eggs. This is the jaguar killing the adult turtles. Anyway, so I will turn that off now. And oh, there, I guess you can see it perhaps better. But anyway, so we'll get that one off there. And screen sharing has stopped as the shared window is closed. Okay. So the answer back to Mia Fox is that the jaguars themselves are not dangerous. There's no recorded record of a jaguar attacking a human being. This is very different from Africa, okay? So this is not, they're not a threat at all. So you're lucky if you are near one and he doesn't decide to run away because he doesn't like you. But they're not a threat. They're not a dangerous animal. And our pumas are not dangerous animals either. They're much smaller than the northern pumas, the same species, but much smaller and not a threat to people. They do kill horses, they do kill cattle, but not, and the jaguars do as well, but they're not a threat to us. Winnie has a very good photograph of a big adult puma right behind the house, about 20 feet from the back of the house at the present time. Okay, so I'll go on to where we are today. Are you, yeah, you're open now, are you?
Hang on. There was an attack that we know of a puma on a biologist, but the biologist was in the Rainforest Park, Cocoralo, in the little Brazil of Costa Rica. And the biologist had basically been living with a tapir in order to study it. So he'd been following it everywhere, not of course washing his clothes. And he probably smelled much more tapir than human. But he did actually have to fend off a puma that attacked him, leaving big raking scars down the front of his thighs. But in general, if you smell like a human, you're not in much danger.
Yeah, but that's a puma, that's not a jaguar. Okay, are we open? Yes, okay. So we go over to here, we go to that, we share screen, and we do this. There we go. Are we on there?
Yeah, we are.
Are we on? Okay. Today the focus is on nature's solar panel. Now, if I say solar panel to you, you usually think of a large metal glass composite object on somebody's roof or on a stand out in a dry area, soaking up sunlight and turning it into electricity. Well, that's fine, but there's a lot more to that solar panel than just the mechanics of standing there and soaking up electricity. There's taxes, there's who owns the land, there's how much did it cost to make it, how long is it going to last, what does it cost to repair it, what does it cost to maintain it, who are the threats to it. All these things are dealt with by leaves as well as by our human solar panels. And so today I'm trying to focus a little bit more on the challenges confronting a natural solar panel as opposed to the kind of solar panels that you're used to thinking of as machines, basically, as human machines. This is a beech tree bud right there in Philadelphia. And it's about to expand in the spring. And you look at this bud and you think to yourself, oh, the tree is making a bud to turn into a leaf. Unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but actually that's not correct. This bud was made last year. This bud was made in the summer before, but very, very small, very collapsed on itself. And so what it's doing now really is simply blowing itself up, or I shouldn't say simply, that's a very complex job, but the point is that it's filling itself with water at the present time. It's not creating the bud leaf tissue. That was created last year. So the first thing it did, it had to survive through the cold winter. It had to survive through the dry winter, because in the wintertime, with the ground frozen and everything very cold, it's very hard for a tree to replace water that evaporates. So if the bud has to be protected inside, and that's what these, let's put that in here. That's what these bracts are for here. They were tight, shut down around the growing point, the very sensitive meristem at the tip of the branch. And they were protecting that bud all during the winter from drying out. They also would protect it from insects and things like that, except though insects aren't active in the wintertime. But if you're in the tropics, then they protect against insects and fungi also. But the point about this thing is that as the bud starts to expand, it is not something that's made at the time of expansion. It's made at something in the previous summer or in the previous rainy season if you're in a tropical area. And it expands some more, but it's largely filling up with water. So at this time, it's got to be warm. It's got water transport. It's got to be easy for the tree, and it's filling. So now at this time, it's not changing its nutrient value very much to the animal who eats it. It had a high nutrient value as a bud, and it continues to have a high nutrient value. But now there's a lot of water along with that, those nutrients. So on a per gram basis, bud quality for the animals going to eat it goes down as it fills up with water. But that's simply, it's got more proportion of water in it. It becomes bigger and expands more, still doing the same thing. And then finally, it's a sort of a full-size leaf. And at this point, and of course, a little bit along the way, at this point, it really goes to work putting the leaf machinery in there. And that's the machinery that actually, the chloroplasts that are actually taking the sunlight, converting it into sugars, and synthesizing proteins, and doing a variety of normal metabolic activities for any kind of living organism. And in this case, the energy for that comes from the sunlight, which is flipped into sugars by chlorophyll. So that's the basic thing. Now, here's the branch that expanded as these leaves expanded. Okay, so right here was a bud. Now the spring comes and that bud expands. So this stem also has been expanded by adding water. And then later on, it fills it up with cellulose and pectin and other things to make it stiff and all those things. But the point is, this is made and the leaf is made. Now, next year, the next buds have to be produced at these axils. So if you want a branch from this point here, it can't come from here or here. It's got to come from that point or that point or that point or that point, because at those points, there still are cells that can divide and turn into, they call meristems, and they're the cells that can divide and grow and produce more cells and therefore more tissue. Now, notice there's a little branch with individual leaves. Well, this looks like the same thing. A little branch with individual leaves. That's not correct. This entire thing is one leaf. So there are no meristems there or there or there. The meristem was back here. So this is a way of making a cheap throwaway branch, as opposed to this is a more expensive branch, and you have to then commit you as a plant to using this space to expand next time. In this case, you dump this back here, and you can go next time in this direction, or that direction, or some other direction. In other words, it gives you a more flexible tree canopy than does the other kind, okay? But these are too big. This is called a compound leaf, meaning that it has different individual pieces, and it's quicker to produce, it's cheaper to make, but it also doesn't give you solid ownership of this space like that branch does. Now, leaves come in a variety of kinds. I'm just realizing it's raining very hard behind me, and I hope that the noise from the rain on the roof is not, it's okay, you can hear all right, all right. When the seed germinates, the first pair of leaves is this one and this one. And they're derived from what are called cotyledons. And you know cotyledons very well, because when you have a peanut and you break it in half, and so you have the two halves of a peanut, each one of those is a so-called seed leaf, or a cotyledon, which is where the seed has stored all the resources it's going to use to grow into a seedling. So this leaf is compromised. It can't be just expand to be a nice big solar panel, because it also was a storage for fat, for protein, and secondary compounds that protected it from being eaten by fungi, by insects, by mice, by animals, by birds. I mean, all those kinds of things. Just like you eat peanuts because they've got a lot of nutrient value, the same way, that's what the seedling is made, is a peanut, as a bag lunch, so to speak. And that bag lunch is exposed right here, but you can still expand it some. And these are maple seeds. There's the two cotyledons, and these plants are called dicotyledons because they have two. Grasses and things like grasses only have one cotyledon, so they're called monocotyledons. Okay. So the point being, this is a leaf, but you can still turn it green some and get some photosynthesis in that very important beginning when you're just a little tiny seedling. Then you make your first pair of leaves. That's this pair right here. Now these look much more like maple leaves, not quite, but in that right direction. Okay, and they will become more and more like maple leaves in the sense of, as the next leaves are produced, they will look more like maple leaves. Once this leaf is formed, it's it. That once it's expanded and the cell walls have become rich in cellulose and pectin to hold them rigid as they are, that's it. That leaf can't expand anymore. It may shrink a little bit if it gets desiccated from a drought and the water is dried out of it, and so it loses water. It can sort of shrink like a balloon can shrink, but this basic shape and size is locked in at this time. So that's the easy solar panel made right there. But again, remember, this leaf right here has a cost. It's got secondary compounds in it that protect it from being eaten by somebody else. It had to make the chlorophyll. It had to have a particular structure, which we're going to get at here in a minute. Now, here's an example. I can't remove the photographs on the right-hand side here, I don't think. So you can't see them all, but you can see different shapes here, right? Yes. These are all very closely related species of plants growing in the same place. They're all a leaf of a different species of vine. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 species of vines in there. And each one has got a very different leaf shape, but then the same place, the same sunlight, the same soil, same herbivores, same everything. What selected for all these different shapes of leaves? And what we now know, having studied these vines a lot, is that there's one group of butterflies whose caterpillars specialize on these species of vines. They're called Passiflora, and the caterpillars are Heliconius. And what we now know is that the mother, the female butterfly, looking for leaves to lay her eggs on. I got to pull my plug so I don't get fried by a lightning strike here. The female butterfly, looking for leaves to lay her eggs on, searches visually, not by odor. So these different shapes are mimics of other species of vines whose leaves are not edible to the caterpillar of this butterfly. So what's happened is that over millions of years, this group of butterflies has selected for mimetic leaf shapes, which mean that the butterfly has a harder time finding the vines, and the vines then obviously keep their leaf crop. They don't lose their leaves to a caterpillar as frequently as they would if they all had the same one shape for this group of plants, which is a norm. If you have a genus of plants, very commonly the 8 or 10 or 15 species in that genus that all have approximately the same leaf shape. And you look at it and you say, oh, I know what that is. Well, the Passiflora, that doesn't work because these look a lot like somebody else. Now, for a very long time, people have observed that the seeds of one species of plant tend to have very similar weights, as in WEIGHT. And in fact, the unit of weight that's used for precious stones, as in diamonds, called the carat, is the weight of one of these seeds right here. Now these seeds are from carob beans. These seeds are from carob beans, and it's a dry fruit that's eaten by big mammals, rich in protein. But the striking thing from our standpoint is that this fruit was filled so that the seeds, each one, has a very similar weight. And this has been around for thousands of years. This is used in a pan balance to weigh very precious small things. And that was 1 carat worth. Each one of those seeds was 1 carat. Well, this is my wristwatch for scale over here. There's one of the seeds from inside. Now, so we know this, and people use this for a long time. And I was at a meeting, and this is an old world plant. It doesn't occur here. Well, it does in gardens, but it doesn't occur wild. I was in a meeting many years ago, and I looked out the window and I saw these fruits on the ground. So I went out and I collected some of them and I shelled the seeds out and brought them back here to Penn and weighed them to see if they really do weigh 1 carat. And what I've discovered was that they're very close. On average, they do very well. But there are some that are a little bit lighter, and some that are a little bit heavier. Not much, but some. So obviously a jeweler would know which seeds he was using when he's weighing your diamonds or your gold or whatever the other precious item is that's being weighed. Okay? Now, this is a green seed. So I go to the plant physiologist 30 years ago and I say, isn't that interesting that the seed is photosynthesizing, just like the fruit does? Here's the green fruit here, the bean. And the statement that came back to me was, no, that's not the case. Because once the seed is made, the chlorophyll is dormant. And it doesn't become active chlorophyll in a chloroplast until after the seed germinates. I said, well, wait a minute, there are green seeds all over the place. You eat them every time you eat green beans and green peas and lima beans. Hello? This turned out to be a novel finding for the plant physiological world, that there are green seeds. Now, what I was interested in the green seed is this. Back here, the amount of resources the seedling has to grow up with is determined by how much mom gave it. So mom determines how much each one of these seeds gets. And that's, of course, a very interesting question, too, is how is it that she allocates every seed the same amount, whether you're way down here, whether you're here, or whether you're up here. Okay. And that's the same true for here. Okay. Now, what is the seed with chlorophyll analogy to? It's analogous to a child who gets a bank allowance, gets an allowance every week to spend as he likes, and has his own bank account that he can fill himself by his own investments. So here we have a parent-offspring conflict, because the parent will dole out X amount, but the parent controls whether sunlight gets to here by whether this seed, whether this fruit wall is in fact penetrable by sunlight. And if it's penetrable by sunlight, the chlorophyll becomes active. The kid has a certain way of making its own resources, so different seeds are going to weigh a different amount. And back here, this fruit wall is never green and penetrable like by sunlight. And the striking thing is that the seeds are very, very close to being equal. Not exact, but very close. When you get over to this legume, this is another bean, these seeds become different in the amount of weight they carry. Now, there are other aspects of chlorophyll and photosynthesis, the solar panel. It doesn't have to be in a seed or in a leaf, but here's a tree trunk where it's in the cambium, the living part of the trunk of the tree. So here we are in the wintertime. Here's the snow over here. And this tree is photosynthesizing in the pure daytime, in the wintertime, sorry, as is this conifer over here. So it's also photosynthesizing in the wintertime. So in order to do this, you have to do the structural engineering to put that chlorophyll in the living part of the stem, the tree trunk. And you can't protect your tree trunk, the growing living part, with a heavy, dense covering of lectin and cellulose and other impenetrable materials like an oak tree. An oak tree has got this very, very thick. This aspen tree has now got its cambium susceptible to and available to animals and fungi all year round because of the being having chlorophyll layer exposed to the sun. So it pays a strategic cost in developing here. The tree does not have leaves on it. This tree has no leaves on it in the wintertime. It's only the tree trunk that's green. And the conifer right next door here pays the cost of having very thick cuticle, very thick waxy layers on the outside of the needle, so that the dry wind in the wintertime can't dry out the needle. So it's not losing water as it would be if it had an ordinary summertime leaf. Now, you say, well, okay, so it pays a little cost for some wax on the outside. But that wax on the outside blocks part of the sunlight in the summertime. So these winter needles make more in the wintertime, but they don't make as much in the summertime as the thin cuticle layer on an ordinary, what you think of as a broadleaf plant. And in a desert, you get the green stem as well. So here, these leaves that you see here, the leaflets, these very tiny leaves, were produced at the time when it rained in the desert. And they drop off. And then from then on, the photosynthesis is all taking place in this solar panel here, which is not an ordinary leaf solar panel. Palo Verde is the common name for this tree in the southwestern U.S. Now, obviously, a tree is more than a particular individual solar panel. It's an whole array of solar panels. And they are a reflection of the age of the tree and the way they're positioned and the number of aspects of this. You're looking at these two trees, and one says, which one is the older? Which was the original tree of these two? And right away, you can say, you're looking at it, you'll see that this is thicker here, and this is thinner. So you say, well, this is the older tree because it's thicker. Well, it is the older tree, but it's not because it's thicker. This guy has put on more wood, that's fine. The reason why you know this is the older tree is there are no branches on this side of this tree. In other words, as this tree was growing up, each time it started to put out a branch, it found itself in the shade of this. So it stopped growing in that direction. And it grew heavily in this direction over here. I'm sorry to be shouting, but I can hardly hear myself with the rain on the roof. But the point being that this tree crown is not an accident. It's an outcome of competition between this tree and this tree over here. That competition makes a number of aspects. This is we're in Malaya, at the present here in Malaysia, looking down on a bunch of tree crowns. It just looks like a whole lot of leaves and individual tree crowns. But if we go underneath it and look up, you see these spaces that outline the boundary between this tree crown here and that tree crown there. Another one over here, one there, one here. The foresters call this crown shyness. And it happens when these trees are the same species. So this is the same species as this is, as this is, as this is. So the outcome of this is that each time these branches, twigs start to grow in this direction, they bump into shade that they're not tolerant of because they're not tolerant of their own shade. If these were two different species, an oak tree and a maple tree, for example, one or the other would be more shade tolerant than the other. So as it grows, whichever one of them is more shade tolerant would grow in underneath the other one. So you get overlapping of the two crowns. I think the difference in the tree shape of this conifer here and this evergreen, and this deciduous species over here is very, very clear. This tree is growing by and large entirely at the tip. So it expands only from the tip outward. This guy can make new branches anywhere. So what happens is that the crown moves out to fill a space. This tree crown can't move out to fill a space. This one can move out to fill a space. This is an extreme example of this. If this tree was in a forest, the species of tree was in a forest, it would have the same shape as this palm tree right here. But on the full sun, its branches go in all directions to get a bigger solar panel. So it just expands, expands, and expands, and adds more and more and more. But this palm does not do that. Why does it not do that? Because it only has one meristem. The tip of this palm up here is the only piece that can make more cells.
Should I try the microphone? No? Can you guys hear?
Yeah,
all right?
I think it might be better now. It's a little bit getting harder
You
to
can
hear.
hear they say, this tree, this palm tree over here, if you come along with an axe and you cut into it, there's no meristem tissue, no cambium that can go out to repair your damage. If you go to this tree here and you cut into it, over the years, that tree will grow new tissue to fill that. In other words, these dicots are much, much more flexible in their growth pattern than our monocots. And this is an extreme monocot that not only has only one cotyledon in the seed, but it has one growing tip up here. So each of these things that you see that go out like that is one leaf. So you probably there want 15 or so leaves on this tree crown. And it can't be any longer than this because once you made the leaf, that's it. So it can't grow and add more and more and more. And their shoot tip is only right in the middle and it can't make branches. So it's restricted to that kind of a shape. So this is one kind of a solar panel, yes, but it's a very not flexible solar panel. Now this is looking down on a mixed forest, many, many species. There's probably 50 to 70 species of trees in this photograph. So this is a tropical rainforest or an airplane looking straight down on it. Now let's go down inside and look inside. You see the bulldozer right here? That's a full-size bulldozer for scale. This tree is 50 meters tall. This is about 45 meters tall. Now, the history of this tree, of this solar panel, is that way back, probably 35 to 50 years ago, a seed germinated here where another tree had died. So there was a hole in the canopy. So this seedling grew straight up, straight up, straight up, straight up, straight up, with a shoot tip that goes only did not put edge and branches out to the side at all. It was only seeking the sunlight straight above. And when it got up to here, it branched out and filled the hole. That's how you get a tree of this shape as opposed to this tree. Because this tree right here, this species of tree in the forest, will do the same thing that you see here. Now, why is this exposed? Because they're logging this. So they've been cutting the forest for timber. The bulldozers are dragging out the logs. And so these trees were left as they went through them. I think this was probably left because there was no value to it. This one might have been of more value, a special tree, so they leave it there like money in the bank until they're later on to harvest it. But it has the same kind of history that this tree over here does. Now, you see the vines hanging up here? The vines hanging down out of that canopy? How did they get up there? There's two ways to get up there. One is that you're a fast-growing vine, and as the sapling starts out and starts to grow here, you'll grow fast enough to stay with it. So you'll keep advancing up the tree all the time. So by the time that you're up to here, you're already up there too. So you go over to here, you go over here, you spread out across branches, one of the branches dies, hit by lightning, insects, fungi, whatever, falls off, and it falls, and this is a piece of you who had started down here, gone all the way up to there, gone over to there, and now you've fallen out of the tree. The other way you do it, and it's another kind of vine, which we'll get to in a minute, is that you climb this tree trunk, going right up the side. And as you got up the side of the tree, you get up to here, you spread out, put your leaves out over here, and then you drop a root from there all the way down to soil. So you get direct water both from the root that picks it up from here and from your own stem, which went up the tree trunk over here. All of this is the result of competition between these tree crowns to get your crown into the sunlight. Now, another aspect of this is this photograph shows tropical dry forest with no leaves, as you can see. It's a dry season, it's got all its leaves, but here's one tree with a full leaf crop. And here's one plant with a full leaf crop. This is an ancestor of a pineapple right here. It's very thick leaves. Like, I don't know, you look at a pineapple closely, you'll see that tuft of leaves that come out of the top of the pineapple. They have a thick cuticle layer on the outside. They're thick like a cactus and hold water. And basically this guy is just making it through the dry season with the water it's got stored inside of itself. This tree over here is a very different strategy. This is one of those trees cut down and held up against the sky so you could see all the leaves. It looks like this for the 6 months with no rain at all. So as a class, we picked all the leaves off so you see what it actually looks like without the leaves. Now, way back when, I couldn't figure this out. So I went out and got a pickaxe and a shovel and decided to dig down to see where this guy was getting the water for all these nice leaves. 1 meter, 2 meters, 3 meters, 4 meters. I was way over the top of my head. And the roots are still going straight down. No lateral roots at all. Just straight down. So this guy has a pipe that goes down to groundwater. It could be 5 meters, 6 meters, 7 meters. I have no idea how deep it was going. But the point was it did not have the root crown that you expect of a plant. Spread out through the soil, getting minerals and water and all that kind of stuff. So what happens is, why is this tree staying leafy in the dry season? It's paying all the resources to go down for the water and not be able to go out laterally and get minerals and nutrients when the rains do come. So when the rains come, all these other plants out here got their lateral roots everywhere, and they're getting resources, but this guy is not, because he's sitting there looking like that. Furthermore, what we determined was that in the dry season, by the end of the dry season, these branches are absolutely stuffed with starch. They're like a potato. By the end of the rainy season, after 6 months of looking like this, these are a completely empty potato. They have almost no starch. So its biology is to be available looking like that in the dry season. So what is he actually found with his his solar panel? A seasonally available desert. In other words, from his standpoint, this is a desert for 6 months of the year. And he gets fine, just like a cactus does. Cactus store water. This guy is tapping the groundwater way below. As opposed to this is how he's surviving. Okay. But to do that, he's got to survive for the 6 months of the year when there is no food in the system in a hot place. Remember, this is not a cold winter where you can turn off and just live on the reserves you have. You're burning up your reserves all during the 6 months of the dry weather, of the rainy season, because you don't have no leaves out there. Now, what stops the herbivores from zeroing in on this plant? Well, these are the leaves. And first off, you notice they're indenting a cactus point on the tip. It's a very, very sharp spine on the tip of the leaf. So I presume that that's selected for to keep big herbivores from feeding on it. But more from that, you take one of these leaves, about 3 inches long, put it in your mouth and chew it. It's exactly like chewing a bar of soap. It tastes absolutely horrible. And those are the secondary compounds that are inside this leaf. And this thing is very striking. It doesn't have any insects to feed on it. No vertebrate herbivores, no insects. It just stands there, looking like this all during the dry season. Cacti, of course, are operating in the same sort of way. This is just a stem, because on a cactus, each spine is a leaf reduced to pure defense. So all the photosynthesis now has been transferred to the stem. So what it does is when it rains, soaks up the water, stores it. This is a canteen. This is a huge lump of water here. When the rains come, it makes very fine roots overnight, literally overnight, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. You get very small roots coming out from this, and they soak up and replenish the water that's sitting inside of here. So they can go for 9 months, 10 months, 12 months with no rain at all, living on the water that they have stored inside of themselves. And what keeps animals from getting that water are the spines and also secondary compounds in the cactus. It has both secondary defensive compounds, but it has to have sunlight. It takes energy to do all this. So where do you find cacti? In the desert. Because it doesn't have the competition in the desert from shade, but it has got a lot of sunlight. In a tropical forest, where do you find the cacti? Epiphytic, sitting on the tops of trees. That's a elevational desert, if you like. Or on the margin. This is the margin. Here's the forest back here, and the ocean is right here. This is a high tide zone right here. So here is a little strip of desert right along the edge, which has good sunlight because these plants here can't tolerate the salt. These guys can tolerate the salt and get the sunlight. They're living right in this intermediate zone. So this is lethal for a cactus. These are 2 of those cacti brought in and planted. They're just about 20 feet behind me. And in the rainy season, when the broadleaf plants, all these others, put all their leaves out, these guys are in deep trouble. So right here, you see a white V on the cactus and another white V. That 1 inch that you see right there is the 1 inch of growth that the cactus put on in 1 year. So now it will now be dormant for 6 months in the shade, do nothing. If you shade it all the time, it simply dies. If you give it 6 months, then maybe of no rain and therefore no leaves competition, then it can add another inch or 2 inches of cactus on the top. Here's one that you know right there in Virginia. This is a winter. These are oaks and maples and other species without their leaves. And right here is a holly tree. And if you go and take a holly leaf, break it up in your unit, it tastes absolutely horrible. It's bordered by spines and has a very thick, waxy coating on the outside, and you won't find any insect damage on the holly leaf. But it grows very slowly. So it's photosynthesizing now in the wintertime, even if there's snow on the ground. It's photosynthesizing. But in the rainy season, in the summertime, all these trees put out their leaves and shade the hollies. The holly doesn't grow at all. Now, this is a solar panel built a kind of different way. This is Wyoming. And this is, you're looking at an original virgin forest that's never been plowed, never been burned. Would have had herds of buffalo on it, and antelope and jackrabbits and other mammals. But that's it right there. That's its height. So when we get down on your hands and knees and look closely at it, here's what you see. That is a tree crown. It might be 100 years old. And all you're seeing is the tips of the leaves sticking out. If I dig it up as I did and turn it over, this is what you see. See, here's the tree trunk that was about, let's say, 10 inches, 15 inches. This might be 100 years old. Here's the tips of the leaves here. The same tips that you were seeing in that previous photograph. There they are there. Now this is flipped over. And here are the major, these are big branches running out through here. Now, this protected it from a major thing, which is the wind blowing across this and going across this and drying it during the cold winter. The wind sculptures the soil, sculptures the rocks. The rocks all have nice rounded surfaces, not because they've been worn by water, but they have been ground off by dust and sand in the wind. So what's happening here is you put the bulk of the organism underground and just put your solar panels up a little bit. They're gray in color because that's a dense fur of hairs. And that protects you more from the wind, but it's green underneath those hairs. So the sunlight penetrates between the hairs and gets to the green layer inside. You can see it was a greenish one right there. These leaves are made new each year. So in the worst time of year, it drops its leaves. And then when the spring comes, up come new leaves. But then it also protects from insects, and it also protects from things like bison, who would come along and decide that the stem would be a great thing to eat if it was 6 inches tall above ground. But what the bison is confronted with is only this, unless it wants to dig through this rock-hard soil to get to it inside. So it's protection from herbivores to some degree, but mostly protection from the wind. I bet the same thing in the Sahara Desert in Africa, where the ground can be carpeted for hundreds of square miles with species of plants that are all just like this. Nobody any higher than just a few millimeters above the wind that pushes those dunes that you're used to seeing in the Sahara. Now here's a different way of being a solar panel if you're a plant. Obviously these are not green. They have actually a little bit of chlorophyll. I don't know what it actually makes with the little bit of chlorophyll and what other functions like vitamins it's getting from the sunlight. But this is a parasite. And what happened was the parent of this plant right here. From here on out is a different plant. Here's the real plant is this thing here. The host plant is this. The parent of this plant produced little yellow fruits, little juicy yellow fruits on the tips of stems. A bird came along and ate the little yellow fruits. When the fruit got in the gut of the bird, the chemistry of the bird reacts with the chemistry of the fruit to turn the interior of the fruit into an extremely gluey material. Sticky glue. The bird then shits, and the glued seed sticks to the anus. So the bird goes to a tree branch and rubs its anus against the tree branch to get rid of the seed. And the seed then germinates on the tree branch and sticks its roots into the vascular tissue of the tree branch. And that's what this lump right here is. It is effectively a cancer or tumor, whatever word you want to use, where you're seeing a combination of the tissues of the mistletoe, which is all of this, and the tissues of the plant. And then this guy is getting all of its, this is getting all of its nutrients from the host plant. This is a very common kind of lifestyle in places where the soil is extremely poor in nutrients. A classic example of this are old fossil beaches, beaches that are 1 million years old and are just pure silicon. There's almost nothing else in them. And the vegetation type that's on those old fossil beaches grows extremely slowly and has a number of these different adaptations for getting nutrients in peculiar ways. So we'll see a few more in a few minutes. So this is one way of getting your nutrients, other than making them yourself, is by extracting from here. And of course, any minerals that you need, you're going to have to pull out of the vascular tissue, out of the vascular fluids in this plant over here, the host plant. But there are some things that don't do that, and they're called saprophytes. And here's a plant that has no chlorophyll at all, white, and lives in the deep, deep shade of forest understory, right here in Pennsylvania and in other places where you have deep, deep shade all the time. And it is actually getting all its nutrients by decomposing old dead leaves. So it's acting like a fungus, but it's a proper plant. It makes proper little flowers and makes proper little seeds. And it simply doesn't, its whole lineage, evolutionary lineage, doesn't have chlorophyll, but it's living in an extremely nutrient poor environment, which is the deep, deep shade. So like it's almost the equivalent of being in a cave. Now, leaves on a plant are not just tossed out there. Just like if you're going to put solar panels on the roof of your house, you don't just put them anywhere. If you look carefully at this tree crown, looking down on it, you realize that they're in a whorl, and the whorl reflects the age. So this is the youngest leaf right here. This is the youngest leaf. This one over here, well, the very young leaf is this one right here. Then the next longest leaf after this one would be this one. And then I'm not sure, I can't tell from this what's the next one around. But what I can say is that if you go and you take, say, this leaf right here, and you measure the vertical distance between that leaf and this leaf, the distance from there, let's say it's 5 inches, or 3 inches, some distance, will be the same distance as if you take this leaf and you hold it in full sunlight over a white sheet of paper and lower it down to the white sheet of paper. There comes a point whereby you have a very sharp shadow of the leaf on the white piece of paper. Now you go back up a little bit and all of a sudden the shadow gets very blurry. There'll be a distance there, 3 inches, 2 inches, 5 inches, depending on the shape and size of the leaf. That distance will be the same distance as the plant makes between this old new leaf and the older leaf underneath it. So in other words, they're being produced radially in a rate that and at a height that they don't shade each other. So in other words, they're not just scattered out there. It's all part of the strategy. It's like, you know, building a mall. When you put the Chinese, you put 3 Chinese restaurants next door to each other, Or do you have the Chinese restaurant and the dry cleaners and the video store separating? You know, I mean, the point is that it's as though the tree is aware of itself. It's not, of course. Selection is just selected for these different behaviors and patterns. This is an extreme case. This is the understory of a tropical rainforest. And these are trees, little plants, old. These are not seedlings. These are adults who will make flowers and fruits at some time. And you can see in this very, very sunlight poor environment how the leaves are spaced so that they minimally shade each other. So this is in effect one big leaf from the standpoint of the plant. In other words, that leaf there will not become any bigger. These will stay the same size that they are. So this is the size that the plant, in some evolutionary sense, has estimated will give it a return on the investment of making the leaf in the first place. This is one that lives in the full sun, but they still do the same thing. You see, and if you were to go out here and pick out the oldest leaf, let's say it might be that one right there, and you measure the distance between it and the newest leaf, which is up in here, you find that again, the vertical distance is such that the shade of this one does not impact seriously the surface of that one there. This is taking one leaf, that's one whole leaf, and organizing the leaflets for the same function. You see what's happened here is there were 3 over here, 3 over there, and then one little tiny one to fill the hole in the middle. In other words, it's taking a compound leaf, but evolutionarily, this was a compound leaf with many, many, many parts. And so what selection has done is made each leaflet bigger and reduced the number of leaflets. This is what gave rise to what you think of as pine tree needles, spruce tree needles. This is a podocarpus. This is 200 million years old. This tree has been with us a very long time. And these are flat, small leaves. So evolutionarily, what's happened to make a pine tree is that each one of these flat, small leaves has become thicker, more cylindrical, thicker wax layer around the outside to make a pine needle. So you end up with this. So each one of those is in fact a leaf, but it's modified out of something that looked like this. In effect, this is a grassy field, but on a branch. So really what we're doing is say the plant's doing the same thing, making a large number of disorganized, thin things that the sunlight can penetrate down through. Now here's the other one. You're on your solar panel, but you don't want to pay the cost of getting it up in the sun. So what do? You turn into a vine, and you pay costs for that. The first thing is you look at it, this was some hapless tree. Okay? And the vine is all the leaves you see here. That's actually several species of vines. And there's some, you can see there's a stem in here, there's some tree in here that the vines have completely climbed on top of. How do you climb? Well, this is one way you climb. See, here's the vine doing this. But notice what happens. If you wrap yourself around this branch, and this branch expands as branches do because they've got cambium and they can grow. It's not a palm tree. This is a dicot, which has got a cambial growth layer underneath all this surface here. As it adds wood and becomes bigger, what happens to you? You break. In other words, it's going to just expand outwards and outwards and put more and more strain on you and then break you. So you see this kind of thing in a place where lifespans are short. The stems of the host plants are short-lived, and the vine is only going to live 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, that kind of very short periods of time. Now here's a different way. Here you don't commit yourself to surviving an expanding tree trunk. Here you do is you sacrifice one leaf. So here's your solar panel coming on, right? But you should have 2 here. So you take and you modify evolutionarily one of those into this thing that waves around in the wind. And when it touches something, it bends in the different direction of what it touched. So it wraps. And so you end up with this down here. It's just this thing. Now this then settles and ties around there and becomes rigid. It can't grow anymore. But that got the vine up to here. As the vine gets bigger and bigger, it's attached more and more up above, and therefore this doesn't matter anymore, and it can shed this connection here. But there's more to growing up than that. This is one that goes up a tree. You know, there's a big tree trunk here, right? And this vine is going up. This vine is going up that tree trunk. And what do you see here? That's a leaf modified into a suction cup. It started out soft, pliable, and literally plastered itself against the tree bark. And then the soft, moldable, pliable material pushed down in between the little cracks and crevices in the tree bark, and then dried hard and locked down. So this is like a suction cup holding this stem, this vine stem, tight against this tree trunk over here. Now this one here, this other vine you see here is a different species doing it a different way. See here it's got one leaf. See here this thing, there's 3 leaves, 3 leaflets. Here's the leaf. 1 leaflet, 2 leaflets, but the 3rd leaflet has been sacrificed into a climbing device, which comes over here and it's got 3 sensitive pieces. And when any one of those sensitive pieces hits something it can wrap around, it does this. So each time it does this, and this is getting yourself up to the sun, you're paying your solar panels for it, but you gain by getting up higher and higher in the canopy. And when you're in the canopy, where are you going to get your water? You don't have a big tree trunk. What you do is your stem turns into a water pipe. It has basically very little or no structural ability. It also stores almost no resources. But look at the holes for the water transport. This thing is pumping water through at the sort of rate that comes out of a faucet in your sink. I mean, the speed at which the water is moving, this is a rainforest vine now, is the speed at which it's moving is analogous to what you're used to when you turn on the tap in the bathroom or in the shower or in the sink. Now, there's more to it yet. This is a seedling. 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old. It's a seedling of the tree I just showed you the cross section through the stem of. Now, what was it doing for 6 years? Well, you can see how little it was growing. It was making 1 or 2 or 3 leaves. And then it would make a little 1 centimeter thing next year and do the same thing again. And then a 1 centimeter and do the same thing again. All that time, it was making a huge underground tuber. What you think of as a potato or a sweet potato. So what it was storing resources. And it was waiting, because they just landed somewhere as a seed. It's waiting until there's a light gap overhead. It might take 20 years, might live 30 years. When suddenly there's a light gap overhead, it immediately starts growing like crazy, using the resources in the tuber. So it'll put on 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters a day. So you can stand there and watch it grow. I mean, it's going extremely rapidly. Here it is here. This is a piece of that stem going extremely fast. And you can see the node here still makes a couple of leaves. This lumpy stuff here is the pieces of tissue that were used to grab a hold. It's one of those suction cups that were grabbing a hold of the tree trunk that it was going up. So here it's growing very fast, but this guy's got to make it up there 25 meters into the canopy on the potato, on the resources it has in the potato, which is underground and therefore generally is not eaten by big vertebrates or by insects. But in addition to being underground, you all know what tapioca is. I suspect you've eaten it as a dessert. Tapioca is a dessert made out of a dried flour of a plant called cassava. And cassava, or yuca in Spanish, is a major starch crop around the world in the tropics. And there are two kinds of cassava that were cultivated by New World Indians. One of them was called sweet cassava, and you had to grow it in the village and get those tubers in the village because it had no chemical defenses. It was only underground, and the animals would learn to dig it up. The bitter cassava, which lives in the forest and is not dug up by the animals, is very rich in cyanide. And indigenous people in the New World figured out a way to leach this, to grind up the bitter cassava and leach the water, leach the cyanide out of it in water so they could make sweet cassava. When this was taken to Africa by the Europeans, what, 1400, 1500, somewhere in there, they took the cassava for people to eat, but they didn't take the recipe. So when you work with people in the field in Africa, so I'm out there and we're doing our stuff and I'm chugging along and they're chugging along and we hit dinner, hit lunchtime. So everybody has cassava pancakes and cassava tortillas and cassava meal, and it comes at lunch, and suddenly then somebody says, okay, it's nap time. And so everybody has to lie down for an hour, hour and a half and take a nap. That is chronic cyanide poisoning from the cyanide in the bitter cassava tubers. And it's a major problem in Africa, and field agricultural workers who are chronically, from childhood onward, cyanide, get a light dose of cyanide poisoning during the day. And it all comes from the defenses of this underground vine tuber, which is protected from, anyway, so there we go. Now when it gets up to the canopy, it turns into another kind of leaf. Here's the other leaves. So we made this kind of leaf in the shade, quite big, quite few. Here are the little scattered leaves along the way as it's growing up. And then when it hits the canopy, look at these great big leaves. Okay. So we make 3 different kinds of leaves as part of its strategy. Another aspect of leaves is this peculiar point on the tip. These have been called drip tips for good reason. If you're sitting in the rainforest and watching the rain fall on the leaves around you, you begin to realize what's going on. This is a leaf from the side, a drip tip from the side, and you see this bubble of water right here, rainwater. It's run fast down the end and dripped off the tip. If you cut off the drip tip, the water pools on the blade. It doesn't run off the tip. So the blade stays wet much longer if you don't have the drip tips. So I said, well, so what? Well, look at these leaves. There's the brand new leaf, which is still expanding. It's got its own sunscreen, which is this coloration I should add. Still expanding. Here's the next oldest leaf. And you notice on the leaf a little bit of epiphyllae, little primitive plants growing on the surface. And then you go to the next leaf and look at it. And you go to the next one, and pretty soon you end up like this. The plant is, the chlorophyll layer is completely shaded by these epiphyllae, blocking your sunlight. So it always was interpreted as what the water plant wanted to do is get the water off the leaf so it dried out, so it didn't have all these little plants growing on the surface. Here's what it looks like close up. I mean, this is a lot of junk, lichens and algae on the surface of the leaf. So here's a new leaf, and here's an old leaf. You can see how much sunlight is being blocked. Like that versus that. Well, somebody finally looked about 15 years ago and discovered that these algae on the surface and the lichens on the surface are fixing nitrogen. And the plant takes up the nitrogen from the water on the surface of the leaf. So that when you get back to this, you now answer the question of why doesn't the plant shed these old leaves that are completely obscured by epiphyllae on the surface? It's because these are valuable for a different purpose. These are effectively an aerial fertilizer. So here you want to photosynthesize. But as you start to build up this junk on here, if you're in a nutrient poor soil, which tropical soils generally are, then you've got a real gain coming to you from this other junk that lives on there. Yeah, this is an extreme case. Now, I just realized I only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to skip over to this about the age of leaves. Here we are. This is our conifers, right? In wintertime, frozen down here. The cranberry bushes, all the leaves are dead. And up here, the trees are mostly leafless, birches and aspen without leaves. And here's these conifers, a full leaf crop, and photosynthesize it. So you've made this leaf that can make it through the winter. Well, then why do you want to throw it away? Why don't you just keep using it over and over again? So here are the new leaves coming out. There's the older leaves on this stem. You back off from it and you realize that every year it's making new ones at the tips and keeping the old ones. So here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. A needle down here on this stem is 7 years old. Complete opposite of a deciduous tree species who makes a leaf for the summer and throws it away. So here you can see that in a certain sense, an anthropomorphic sense, that the plant can afford to put a lot of resources into being not edible, not dry out, and do whatever other functions it needs to do as contrasted to the thin summertime leaves. This is rhododendron from right over here on the Schuylkill River. And here we see the new leaves from this year, last year, year before, year before, year before. So that's 5 years worth of leaves on this rhododendron. What we know is that if deer feed on these green leaves in the wintertime, the cartilage in their knees falls apart and they die. So a deer will only eat these leaves if it's absolutely starving. It's a starvation food. Point being that these leaves, like the pine needles, are very well protected against a variety of animals. I'm not saying somebody can't get through, because somebody does get through, but they're very well protected. And this is the champion of the globe. This is a Welwitschia leaf here. It grows for 50 years, continually at the tip. And at the base. So it breaks all the rules. It's from South Africa. Breaks all the rules of plant growth. It grows in South African deserts. And you can have this leaf can be 5 meters long. Okay, I don't have a photograph. This is one in a greenhouse. I've never seen one in nature. And finally, the last thing I want to point out is a strategic one. Here's an adult juniper tree right here near our house. The dry season, drop its leaves. These are fruits for next year. Now, it's going to sit like this all during the dry season, leafless, and then when the rains come, makes a leaf crop. Fine, a perfectly normal kind of tree. But if you cut it down in the dry season, it stops behaving that way and immediately starts to make leaves and branches. So what the tree is saying to itself is, oops, I've just lost my position in the canopy. So I'm going to take all my resources in my roots and use them to get as fast as I can back up into my hole in the canopy before the trees next door to me fill it with their branches. This happens over and over and over again. In other words, you have an adult tree behave in such and such a way, you cut it down and take the whole canopy, you destroy its competitive ability to own a piece of the canopy. And immediately it takes all its resources, whatever it's got, and flips them back into. Now in the wintertime, you couldn't do this because it's too cold, but in a tropical dry season, it's still warm enough to do this. So you can see these are plants out here which have lost their leaves. It's the dry season. This guy got cut down by, I think, a bulldozer, I can't remember. But he had a big adult root system. And so immediately he put his resources into making a canopy. I have only 1 minute left here for one other kind of sunlight resource. You can be in the forest understory, the sun moves overhead, and the sunspot walks across the forest floor and hits your leaf, as you see right here. You either have to be susceptible, you either have to be totally turned off so you do not respond to that, and then go on being a shade leaf, or you have to turn on like instantly and photosynthesize for 12 minutes while it's going across you. And both mechanisms occur. Both kinds of leaves in the shade, both kinds of leaves living in the shade do those, different species do different ones of these. So one is to harvest the leaf spot as it's going by. The other is to ignore it and not let it perturb your physiology. And finally, the red coloring that comes with new leaves all the time, red, blue, white, is sunscreen before there's chlorophyll. So the chlorophyll absorbs the UV, but these are pigments put in the leaf by the plant to protect the living tissues inside the plant from UV until the leaf is fully expanded and has its layer of chlorophyll in it. And those are the same red colors and yellow colors that you see in the fall when the tree pulls its chlorophyll back out of the leaf and gets ready to dump the leaf. Okay. So we'll stop there. Okay, there are a few more slides, but I don't have the time to keep going on them, so we'll stop. Okay. There we go. Okay.